Random Badassery.
I remember the first time I recorded a podcast. See, I used to have this podcast, and I used to do it with a co-host. And the first time that we recorded an episode, we recorded it in my room. And we recorded it using Apple earbuds. Not AirPods, earbuds. You know, the ones with the cords? The first words of that podcast were, "So, what's up, man?" Because we really didn't understand the format of podcasting. I don't want to say that like we had never heard of podcasts before, but when you sit down in front of the microphone, or in that case, in front of the earbuds, there's this sudden pressure. I can't explain it. You could have a person in front of you and talk without any forethought, with any hesitation, without any hesitation, that is. But when you turn on a microphone, something changes, both good and bad. But I did podcasting for a long time. I did many podcasts, and one thing that never changed was false starts. That every time I sit in front of the microphone, I'd start, either something would go wrong, or I'd say something and realize it sounded stupid. So I'd stop and start again. And today is no different. All of a sudden, my voice started to get froggy the moment I sat in front of the microphone. God, do I remember how to do this? Because I gave up on podcasting for a fair amount of time. In fact, I'm not even sure when the last time I recorded a proper audio-only podcast. And yes, in some way, I'm kind of a purist, because I was podcasting, back when when Apple gave you headphones with wires in the box. But yeah, I feel weird about these video podcasts calling themselves podcasts. They're not, they're just shows. They're videos. A podcast to me is distinctly audio sent over the internet. So anyways, I don't remember the last time I did a proper podcast. Now, because of false starts, there are things that I might say right now that I might have already said that I don't remember already saying. But that first podcast that I did, which at the moment of recording this, I think I'm going to bring that name back. Random Badassery. I did that with a co-host. And we had a nice run. I don't remember how long. I think it was a year. We went from literally 2 listeners, which was him and I. And then by the end of that run, we were in the thousands, which is not huge, but for us it was a big deal, and it was a lot to get done in a year. And I don't think I appreciated how much we had got done, how much reach we had gotten in a year. But after years of doing other things and never reaching that same level, I really understand. Now, there's a lot of reasons I never reached that same level again. A lot of it was never really kind of finding something I wanted to stick to long enough to see if it would grow. But then things have also changed. Social media, I think about the first time that I got on Twitter. It was pretty easy to get followers, because I don't think that at that time we were thinking about followers necessarily. But it was easy to get in contact with famous people, to be honest. There was no gatekeeping. I got into several conversations with some very famous people. Granted, they were probably completely inane conversations because we didn't really know what we were doing on Twitter in those days. But then the period after that, it became pretty easy to get a following just by posting consistently. I think when I deleted that Twitter account, because I quit social media for several years, when I deleted that, I think I had somewhere between 10 and 25,000 followers, and I've never got back up to that level again either. And even when I've behaved consistently as I did back then, it doesn't have the same effect. The reach is not there because things have changed. So I'm curious. I'm even talking about this now. I'm curious about how podcasting has changed. And I think part of that is everybody's trying to do video. And I'm resisting doing video. It's not that I don't like YouTube. It's not that I don't do videos. I mean, I have several YouTube channels, 2 of which are surprisingly successful despite my neglect of them. I don't know if I've told this story publicly, but my Zettelkasten channel, where I talk about the analog note-taking, I really only made that channel to document that experiment. So when I stopped doing that on a regular basis, when I stopped working with the analog notes on a daily basis, I just stopped recording videos because there's nothing to talk about. And I never thought about it because I have my other channel, which is where I review EDC gear, like what knife I like, or what's in my wallet, stuff like that. Some of you probably think that's super boring. And some days I agree with you. It's been a long time since I recorded a video for that channel. But anyways, the Zettelkasten channel, I just didn't even click in, when you're in YouTube, or if you have multiple accounts, you can just stay in one account. And if you don't ever go to the other account, you never see what's going on with that account. So I was in the account that's associated with the EDC for, I think, a year or more. And one day I was sitting in front of my TV watching YouTube and going through the home feed and looking at recommended videos. And as I'm going through, I pause and I looked at this thumbnail and I was like, oh, this flicker of recognition of like, oh, that looks familiar. Those hands look familiar. And then slowly the gears turn. I'm like, oh, those are my hands. Oh, it's recommending me a video from my other channel. And then I glanced down and looked underneath where it tells you how many views the video had, and it was like 4,000 views. I had no clue. When I was putting those videos out, they were getting like 12 or 20 somewhere in there views. I think one of them got to like 100 at one point. So a year of neglecting it, and wow, unbelievable. And the same thing with the EDC channel. There's videos on there that are in the thousands that I wasn't even aware of. I wasn't aware of it until I noticed this about the other channel, and then I was like, well, what's going on with this channel? So I talk about the EDC channel in past tense and present tense because I'm not sure what's going on with that. I have a feeling that I'm not done with that project. There's still things that I want to post there. And I've considered repurposing the other one, but I'm just not sure about that. Part of me likes the purity of it. It's about that one thing. And if somebody finds it, they find one of those videos and they go to that, all they're going to do is find, I think it was like 10 videos that I made that are all about that one thing. That's pretty neat, instead of just stacking something else on top of it. And already, this far into this episode, I'm noticing something that seems familiar about this process, which is this is not the order that I planned about talking about these things in. It just happens. I try to work with podcast episodes. I try to work not without notes, but with, I guess you could say, with bullet points or with Post-its. Just the general idea of like, here's 4 or 5 things that you can talk about. It's almost like I'm laying out a set list almost, except I don't want to stay strict to it, and I don't script it, because if I start getting too detailed with the notes, then I end up getting to a point where every episode gets more and more closer to scripted, and then it becomes scripted. But if I come into these with no post-its or no notes or anything like that, then I get lost. I ramble. I don't know what I'm talking about. I forgot where I was. And I listen to it afterwards, and then I'm embarrassed to release it, because it's like a conversation where nobody, how can I say this? When you have a conversation, you can talk about whatever you want. You can go on tangents. You can do all those things, but there's always a baseline. There's always something you have to return to if you're, a decent conversationalist. And that's the other person. The other person's still there. The other person's still going to interject. The other person's going to have different views. The other person's going to have control of the conversation on their end to some degree, depending on how generous of a conversationalist you are. But when that other person isn't here, there's no baseline. The field is open. And you don't know what direction you're going to go in, and you don't know how far you're going to go in that direction, and you don't know if you're going to be able to find your way back. So I find it useful to come in with kind of a map. So looking at my map right now is not as easy as you think, because there are points all over it that I've already covered. Because when I make these things, I think, okay, this, and then chronologically, this would make sense to follow this idea after this, and this would make sense to follow this after that. And then my brain decides, you know what? Let's go left. Let's go into this field. So I think I was talking about having a co-host. I've already talked about one of the advantages of having a co-host when I said the thing about having a conversation. When you're in a podcast episode, there's another thing you have to worry about other than rambling, which is losing your train of thought. And while this isn't live, it always kind of feels like it's live. You always feel like you're recording live. So you don't want to lose your train of thought, because then it leads to this. And obviously, with editing, you can cut out these dead silences, but you just don't want to do it. And when somebody else is there, they can see you drop the ball and they can pick it up. And that's a huge advantage that I'll call it group podcasters, because you can have more than two people. Group podcasters have over solo podcasters. The problem with my original show, the reason that it didn't continue much further, multiple reasons. One was I talked to, what's the guy's name? Nick Fountain. He is was at the time, one of the producers of Planet Money. I don't even remember who makes Planet Money. It's a big podcast, or it was. I had somebody hooked me up with him, and I had like a 5-minute conversation with him, and he gave me all of his advice. And what I didn't realize at the time was he was coming from a news or a journalistic perspective, and also coming from a show that's essentially 15 minutes long. What we were doing was not journalism. It was two people having a conversation, and it was an hour to an hour and a half. I tried to apply the principles that this guy gave me, and it made for 2 really weird episodes. And then all of the things that weren't working between me and my co-host, I think they came to a head right there, and we just kind of parted ways. I think the podcast was never as important to him as it was to me. Like, I saw it as an opportunity. I think he just saw it as a chance to hang out, which is fine. Whatever. It's not a judgment. It's just there was a difference there. Like, he would want to talk about personal things about, like, he would want to have a conversation him and I would have over coffee or drinks about our friends. And I didn't understand why we would record that, because nobody knows those people, so why would they care? So there's a little bit of friction there. So I think probably annoyed him, because I'm sure I did, because I kept trying to say, let's not talk about those things. Let's not talk about those things. So it's almost like I guess I took on a bossy role, which I hated. I hated it. I hated having to even mention those things. But it was important to me, and I didn't know how to voice those, maybe in a better way. I don't know what the hell I was doing, to be honest. And then scheduling was a pain. He always seemed to have a job that somehow made it hard for him to get home on a specific day at a specific time. So we always had these scheduling issues, and that's fine. But the problem was, it was always me having to initiate, and I started to get annoyed after a while. I started to get annoyed because I felt like between that and this other like bossy role that I hated, I started to feel like, I don't know, I guess, and this is nothing against him, but I started to feel like I was behaving like a yard duty or something like that, and it just didn't like how I felt. So from my perspective, that's kind of why I let it go. And I think he let it go probably because he was annoyed with me because of all the same things I just said. So then here I was with this podcast solo all of a sudden, and I decided, I'll do interviews. I don't want to go down this road too long about all the things I failed to do, but I did interviews for, I think, a year, and I hated it. Not because I hate talking to people, but because of the same things I was just talking about. Oftentimes people would reschedule with me at the last minute, or be late, or not show up, or not have a microphone. And again, I started feeling like I was like a yard duty, and I hated it. And in one particular, I won't say the person's name, but probably at that time for that podcast, it would have been my most high profile guest, which in the grand scheme of things, this person is not that high profile. Most people don't even know who this person is, but compared to everybody else, much higher on that echelon of, I guess you can call it air quotes, fame. This is a person who had been on TV for many years, okay, for actually over a decade. So in that way, higher profile. The most irresponsible person I've ever spoken to. I rescheduled that recording close to 12 times. And then we finally got to one day where we were both there. And he tells me, oh, you know what? I don't have my microphone today. I loaned it out to somebody. And then at a certain point, I started rescheduling. He just stopped replying to me, just ghosted me. So that was kind of like my last straw. I was like, I'm done with this. And I tried to go back to the co-host thing, and nothing ever worked the way the first thing worked. And I think it was, to some degree, the ignorance of it. People don't talk about this often, but when you're starting a project, there is a beauty to nobody knowing who you are or what you're doing. I've done a lot of YouTube over the years. I've done a lot of podcasting over the years. I've done a lot of writing projects over the years. There's something beautiful about those beginning stages. It's also frustrating because, you want to get to the thing where you feel like you're succeeding at this thing that you're doing. Oftentimes that means you want to get to a point where you're making some kind of money. So that you can justify all of this work that you're putting into this thing and be able to say, hey, it's a job. I think in the initial phases of podcasting, one of the things that was always difficult for me was getting to the part of, I don't even remember how, this was before things like Substack. I remember what our monetization plan was. It might have been just to get to a point where we had commercials. I don't remember. Oh, there was Patreon too. Patreon was around. But it was always hard to get to that phase because I felt like there was always this worry that people were going to interpret that as like, I don't want to say pity. I don't know how to explain it. But there was never this idea of, I'm doing work, and if I get paid to do that work, then it can become a job. It was more like, will you be nice enough to give us money? It was almost like a charity thing to it. So you're always kind of afraid to ask for it. But now I don't see it that way. Now I see it as, hey, I put a lot of work into this. I would like to be able to continue to do it. And in order to do that, I need to make money from it. And I don't know how that looks today, but that is definitely my mindset. And I'm very clear on that and understanding the benefit and the purpose of that. I mean, I'm 46 years old. I don't have time to just screw around. If I'm doing something, it's because I care about it. If I care about it, then I want to continue to do it. And oftentimes, being able to continue doing things that require a lot of time and effort means money. So that's one thing that's changed a lot over the years, is my understanding of that. And trust me, I learned a lot of lessons on that too. Oftentimes giving up on things too fast because they don't look like they're going to get to the stage where you'll be able to make a benefit of it. Sometimes you have to stick with it and not make anything for a while in order to get there. I just saw a suggested video. I didn't even watch it. I just saw the thumbnail for it. but it was I always say his name wrong. Marcus Brownlee, but I can't remember. Is it MKBHD? Yeah, I always get the letters confused. Very successful tech YouTuber, very successful YouTuber in general. But the thumbnail was, on the left side was a picture of him as a young kid when he first started his YouTube channel, and a picture of him now. And like I was saying, those beginning stages, there's something beautiful about it. That, he was at that stage where nobody was watching. And I will get back to that point also. But on the left was him at the beginning, him now, and then I think the thumbnail said something like, this is what happens when you consistently upload for 15 years. And it's true. If you stick with something long enough, sometimes you just end up reaching another level just because you're still there. But those beginning phases, as I was saying earlier, they're beautiful because you don't have to think about that stuff. Because nobody's watching. Nobody's listening. Nobody's paying attention. Now, sometimes you can get frustrated because you have that leap to the job mentality in mind. Like, oh man, I can't wait till I get to the point where I'm making money from doing this. Sometimes you can get obsessed with that, especially when you're starting out. I definitely did, where you look at the numbers too much and it ruins some of it. You got to enjoy those early phases. You got to enjoy that nobody's listening. And going back to the turn on the microphone and the false starts, it's kind of a similar thing. You got to be able to have episodes where there's false starts. The whole episode's a false start. The whole episode's, it's not something in 5 years you're going to want to show people. That's the thing about podcasting, YouTube, these mediums where we put out content more consistently. You don't want to have episodes early on that in 10 years you go, oh, one of the episodes you should check out, it's episode number 16. No, you don't want that. You know what? You want them to want to hear the last episode you did, or the one right before that, the most recent episodes, because you want to be growing and improving so much that looking back at where you started is so different. And I don't mean changing things like I was talking about, changing the name or changing the scope and all of these things that I've done over the years. I mean that you get into a groove, and then the groove becomes something of its own. Kind of in the way that we can compare it to the way I'm talking right now. It's very different to how I was talking when we started this episode. I've kind of fallen into a groove of this topic. Haven't been looking up at the screen even at my post-its, because all of a sudden I have something to say. And that's kind of the point of these. They're not actually post-its. I'm looking at Heptabase. I just have some text in some colored squares in front of me. But that's the point of them. They're there to catch me because there's not another person here to catch me. So that if all of a sudden this derails, or I never really got it started and I just fumbled my way through it, I can grab one of those. But sometimes you're going to have episodes that never get started, really. You're always just picking up the pieces. You're really always looking for this naturalness to happen, and it never quite happens. But that's the fun part. There's this risk to it that's fun. For example, I don't know if I even want my co-host to hear what I said about him, because I would think that in some way maybe I would bother him. But then there's a part of me that says, well, no, maybe it wouldn't. Maybe I do want him to hear it. Maybe he'll hear it and he'll want to come and be a guest on the show, and I'll have a second person here for an episode. The risk. Who knows? The truth is, 5 people are probably going to listen to this episode. That's the truth. And that's okay. Because, once again, there's a beauty to it. So I think maybe that's part of the reason that I'm excited to be picking up that name, Random Badassery, again. I've stayed away from it all these years. I never went back to it. Because to me, it was always, even though I went on solo with it for a little while, it was always him and I. Because we started that together. And I think I'm just taking ownership of it. Mostly because, a lot of the things that I have online right now on my social media all use the words read or die slave, which is great. That's actually something that goes all the way back to high school. That's a phrase that I've had since high school, something I wrote in a notebook in high school. But that to me is specifically about books. I didn't want to do a podcast about books because I've done it, I've played around with it. It just doesn't work for me because it changes the way that I interact with books. It changes the way that I read, and not in a good way, not in a way that I enjoy. So I didn't want to do that. And so I had this idea like, hey, I kind of miss audio podcasting. What am I going to do a podcast about? I love true crime podcasts. Not the ones where they do a different case every week. Those are okay. But I like the ones where it's like one unsolved case for like a season. Like right now, I just finished re-binging all the seasons of Up and Vanished. And I just finished binging all the seasons of... It's a crime junkie podcast, but it's not with Ashley Flowers. It is... Oh, man. I can't... It's Delia D'Ambra is the host. I can't remember the name of the podcast right now. But I just binged all of those last week. So, there's the question that comes to mind. Well, maybe I should do a true crime podcast. But then when you sit and you think about... There's, three things I think about when I think about true crime podcasts. First thing is I don't like doing interviews, at least not confrontational interviews like Payne Lindsay and Delia D'Ambra, like they have to do in order to do those kinds of shows. But then there's the other kind of show where you could just do a ton of research. The problem with that is it's really hard to do research on those things without interviewing people in a way that is factual enough that you don't feel... How can I put this? It's really important when you're dealing with an unsolved case to not put disinformation out there. And so many podcasts and so many, that's one of the reasons I don't like these podcasts that they do one case, one episode a week, because it's a really fast research process. And oftentimes they're repeating things that aren't true. So then like this official story that most people know out there could be completely untrue. I think there's this young girl that went missing called Aisha Degree. And there are a lot of details out there that have been repeated. Every time this case has been done, have been repeated, that are actually untrue, that are not factual. So there's all these people out there thinking they're going to help solve these cases or whatever, but they're working with stuff that's not true. Unsolved Mysteries, huge fan of Unsolved Mysteries. The original show mostly, but I also do like what Netflix has done. I just wish they would do it more often. But Unsolved Mysteries was notorious for getting things completely wrong. Completely wrong. Names, dates, details, descriptions, you name it, they flubbed it. So there's this weight that I see in it, this responsibility that I don't think it's something you should go to casually. And I just didn't know that I was ready to dedicate myself to something like that. So I was left with no ideas, just this inkling, this feeling. And yesterday I was going through moving some notes around between apps, something we'll talk about in a little while, I think, if we get there. And as I was moving stuff around, I realized, oh, this is it. This is the podcast. Because every day I have daily notes where I'm throwing in the stuff that I'm either, like quotes that I'm, for example, if I'm reading a book, maybe I highlight 10, 12 things in the book while I'm reading it. There's usually one or two things that really stand out, though, that it's just like, oh, those are the tidbits that are, everything else is interesting or is useful to understanding what I'm reading, but there are like one or two that are like, oh, that's pertinent to me right this second, either to my life or to a train of thought that I'm on right now. So those go in the daily pages, and then thoughts and ideas and feelings and things that I have go in there too. So I have every week I have 7 of these notes. And I realized, I could just look through those and go, okay, kind of like what I just said about the 10 quotes, the 1 or 2 that stand out. Go through these 7 pages and just grab the things like, this still matters. This still stands out. This still matters. And those could be my Post-its, like I was talking about, my virtual Post-its, my stepping stones. And from there, I can sit in front of a microphone and see what magic happens with those things in front of me. Not worried about hitting all of the points, but just moving through them and seeing what happens. So that's my goal. But then it hit me. I can't really say that fits with Read or Die a Slave. I mean, if all I was talking about was book quotes, kinda. But it doesn't really fit. And besides, I have an idea of what I would do if I were to do a podcast for Read or Die a Slave, but it's something that I want to happen organically. That if I ever get to the point where my head is in that space, that's the project that I would do. But my head's not in that space right now. And as I'm thinking this out in my head, I'm going, I just want to do random stuff. Just random things, or things that seem random, and then try to, as I'm talking, I probably find a way between them. Because, they're all important to me for some reason. So there's got to be some connecting line between some of them. Random. And then I was like, yeah, like random badassery. Because when we first started that show, we didn't know how to describe it. Some episodes we would talk about creativity. I was a YouTuber at the time, so we talk about my YouTube and what it was like doing this on YouTube or figuring this out, or we talk about writing. Both of us were writers. Or we talk about, like in the first episode, I think we talked about Apple products for the whole thing. So we came up with the name Random Badassery because it just kind of covered everything. And I think when I go back to the beginning, the reason that always worked for me is because I am kind of random like that. And one of the things that's never worked for me all these years is picking one niche and just sticking to it. Even books, which I love, and I can have many niches among books, even that is a little too constrictive for me. So I think that's why I'm finally taking ownership of that name. But in using that name, I'm not, at least not now, I'm not going to put up the archives of the old show. This is like a new show, starting over. Mainly for 2 reasons. Number one, for confusion. People see these old episodes with this huge gap, and there were 2 people, and now there's only 1 person. And the chances of somebody listening to this episode to hear me talk about that for far too long are slim. And the second reason is him and I are not even in contact anymore. Like a couple months ago, I sent him a text message. He never even replied. We haven't talked in years. So I don't even know how he feels about that. I know he's in local government now. So like having some of those audio conversations, which were uncensored, not to say that there was anything wrong with them, but just, I know the way that being in the public eye, sometimes some people want to dig into your past and just find that one thing you said once that's buried in an episode that you didn't even mean that way, but I don't know how he feels about that, so I can't ask him. So that's another reason I'm not putting it up. Though I did say earlier, as I said earlier, if he does find out about this and he wants to pop in, that'd be fun. Yeah, why not? Another thing that should be pointed out, I'm using my real name again. Chad Hall. That's my real name. For the past couple years, I've been using Curly Green K Hall. It's a pseudonym. When I moved to Texas, I picked it up just because there's a lot of reasons, but mainly I was moving to another state. I was at this stage where I felt like I was starting over with a lot of things, so I rethought a lot of things, and I thought a lot about the internet and how, kind of like what I just said about putting up the old episodes, and sometimes having your real name out there with a lot of things attached to it, I think we've learned can be hazardous. Let's put it that way. You open yourself to a lot of different things. And I decided, you know what, maybe I did it wrong. Maybe I should have always been using a pseudonym. So I decided to start using a pseudonym. That way I can, keep my name to myself. But then strange things happen. For example, Instagram is something that I've been using again recently. Like I mentioned before, I had quit social media for a long time. So Instagram is something just within the last year, I think, I've just brought it back. One of the things I enjoy doing on there is taking photographs, using kind of, there's a theme going on here, but kind of the way that I used to use Instagram a long time ago, back before Facebook even bought them. Just taking pictures of, what's going on in life. Not these fancy views of like, here's me on a yacht, but just like, here's me eating a corn dog. Or not even a picture of me. Here's just a picture of the corn dog. But going around New Braunfels in Texas, which is where I live, there are a lot of cool things here. I like taking pictures of them, and I'm at the age and the place in life where I like supporting local businesses. It's something that I think about. And things get a little weird if you're going around town taking pictures of businesses and, tagging them and stuff like that, and you're not using your real name, because at a certain point, you're going to meet the people that own these businesses, and they're going to connect you with that social media account, and then you kind of have to explain why you have two names. So things get a little weird when you have a pseudonym in that way. But if you're not attached to an actual community, a physical community, maybe it matters less. So that's one of the reasons. And, I think it's time to just be me again. Just, I guess, put myself out there again. So there might be some things out there you'll find with the old name on it. I don't remember where I have a lot of stuff. Some of the things say my real name, some still say Curly. You can still call me Curly if you want to. It's always a nickname that I've always been connected to in some way. What's funny is that one of the notes that I put on this episode for myself of things to say was to warn you all that this is going to be a fairly tech or technology heavy episode, because some of the other stuff I wanted to talk about are about technology and tech, and I just wanted to make it clear that that's not every episode. Yet here we are like 40 minutes into this, and I haven't really talked about technology at all. I didn't expect that section to be as long as it was, but that's, it's the magic. So let's move towards that tech stuff here, because I want to explain maybe a little deeper why I'm choosing audio and not video. I touched on it a little bit there, earlier, but not enough. First of all, my problem with video or doing video consistently, I see a lot of these people who do YouTube videos multiple times a week, and I don't understand how they do it. Years ago, I did I had a vlog, where you take the camera around and you show your life. I think that term has changed now too, but I did a daily vlog for something like 200 days. Every single day I recorded and uploaded a video. It was complete chaos. It burned me out. It almost destroyed me, to be honest. I learned a lot though. Ever since then, and probably because of that, one of the things that deters me about video and seeing people upload so much is knowing how much time they have to spend editing. And I'll be honest, I don't like that. I don't like doing the editing. I'm decent at it. I'm not bad at it. When I actually take the time, if I did a weekly video, I could do a great one. But in some way, this goes back to some of the lessons I learned about effort and time put in and money gotten back out. I'm not as willing to put as much into something that doesn't give me money, that doesn't pay me like a job, than I was when I was younger. Now I'm willing to do a little bit. I'm willing to do to a certain point, but I'm not willing to put in 20 hours of editing in a week to have a killer video. And the reason for that is not even the money necessarily. It's that if that succeeds, if those videos are successful, that doesn't mean that I get to do less editing. It means I get to do more. It means I have to keep doing it. And it oftentimes means I have to do it more often because people want more. You know, if you're doing it once a week, you really want to give your channel a boost, you kick up to twice a week. And that's moving in the wrong direction for me. Now, granted, a lot of this stuff in the next 5 years is going to change dramatically because of AI. In fact, when I signed in, I'm using Descript right now to record this. When I signed into Descript and signed back up for an account, I saw a notification for June 4th, you know, some kind of live webinar or something. Biggest changes to Descript and working with AI. I have a feeling that that's going to be a lot of AI brought into the editing process because I'm not alone and being someone who hates doing that stuff. So audio is easier, you know, especially with a tool like Descript, because I can say, you know, there's been a few times here where I had to clear my throat or I had to pause, and I can just click a couple buttons and it'll pull that out. And if I have any extra long ums, it'll pull that out. And I can go in and I can do stuff pretty quick in that app, but it's different than video. And one of the things about video, though, that deters me the most, even more than editing, is actually getting in front of the camera. I'm not camera shy, but there are things about getting in front of the camera that getting in front of the camera requires more thought ahead, more thinking ahead than I want. I want this to be something immediate, like, okay, let's go in there and do it now, and just go in and plug in the microphone and go. You can't do that with video. I've tried it. Bad things happen. You record a video and then you realize there's food in your teeth. Are you going to re-record the video, or are you going to upload the video with the food in your teeth? Which one? Both options suck. I watched a video, or part of a video on YouTube the other day. The guy had this nice maroon t-shirt on, and he had like 2 or 3 stains on it right under his collar. And to me, it looked like, you know, like when you're eating an oily salad dressing, like olive oil or something, and it splashes on your shirt, and that oil just kind of sinks into the, that's what it looked like to me. And it was subtle, but you could see it. I was like, oh, he did what I did. He didn't check his shirt before he hit record. Although with me, usually it's pet hair. I'll sit down to record and the dog or the cat has just been laying on me and I have pet hair. You know, I do the brush, but then there's like 4 or 5 that all of a sudden the camera can see that you couldn't see, or it's on the microphone itself. Or the other one that drives me nuts. I sit down and record and I'm like, man, I really should shave. I have to shave just to record a video. Someone who's in the exact body shape that you want, which I am not one of those people. There's always I don't like the way my face looks this week. So by not doing video, I don't have to deal with any of that crap. Not to mention, the thing about audio that I really enjoy is I use the headphones. So I can hear myself closer to the way that you hear me, as opposed to, you know, the way you normally hear yourself. And because of that, there's something really immersive about this. And remember I talked about those magic moments where I'm just talking and I'm not going from notes anymore? Those happen more often with headphones. So another reason why audio. And actually today I'm using an Apple feature that I've never used before. I'm using Sidecar. Sidecar allows you to use your iPad as a second screen. I don't know why. I never thought about doing this before, but I love having my notes dead in front of me on the actual computer and being able to just look at those and just, you know, like I said, half the time I'm not even reading them, but they're just there as reminders, and just I'm getting lost, as I said. But at the same time, I need to be able to look at the audio level of Descript to make sure that, you know, something hasn't happened. I've accidentally stopped recording, because after years of doing this, that's happened before. Happened to me from an interview one time. I lost the whole interview. And it was great. It was with a friend of mine, luckily. But it was a great interview. We had so much fun. And then we had no audio. So because he was a friend of mine, we did it again. On a different day, we did it again. And it wasn't as good. Because, something was lost. We didn't try to recreate it because we couldn't remember a lot of the stuff. But we were just in a different mood that day. And we didn't gel as well as we did that first time. So ever since then, I've always made sure that I can see that. But the problem is I hate this split screen thing where you got one on one side. There's just too much going on the screen and it distracts me. So with the sidecar, I can put the iPad down here and use it as a second screen. I have the Descript app down there. And my mouse can move between them like it's another computer screen. It's awesome. I don't know. I'm sure I'm 4 or 5 years behind praising that feature, but my first time caller, long time listener, Oh, I have I want to talk about these things, but I'm afraid that this one is just too long. I had some stuff about apps, but I think I'm just gonna skip over that. It's not that important. But I do think, since everything we've been talking about here is bringing this podcast back, and as you can imagine, the next episode is hopefully it's not going to be about the same topic. But I do think it's important to talk about what I've discovered about social media or online presence. Maybe it's a different way, because some of these things aren't necessarily social media. For years, especially since messing around with the name Read or Die a Slave, actually even before that, I could never figure out my balance on these things. Like, what do you do on X that you don't do on Instagram? Or what do you do on Instagram that you don't do on X? Or do you do the same thing on both? And if you do, why do you have both? And then, and if you're doing those things there, then what is the Substack for? And then what is YouTube for? And not understanding how all the pieces work. Not having a specific project, not having a podcast, not having anything that I was really, like my number one project for a really long time, meant that I kept these platforms and I just started using them, and they've kind of started to develop identities of their own. And for the first time, maybe ever, I actually understand how all these pieces work. Like for X, mainly what I do there is posting the normal, what do we call it? If it's not Twitter anymore, we don't call it tweeting. Posting? We just call it posting, I guess. Xing? That sounds weird. There's the normal stuff like that, which I try to I don't get in arguments. I don't do that stuff. I don't do that quote unquote normal stuff. But the normal posts, like you just have a sentence here or there, the stereotypical tweet, sometimes that stuff happens, but mostly what I try to do there is, when I'm working in my notes, when I'm looking at my note app, which right now is Heptabase, when I'm developing knowledge, whether it is some quote that I'm bringing in and I'm trying to reword it in my own words, those little insights and interesting little insights that I log into my own daily journal page in the app, those are the things that I post over there. And then sometimes as these thoughts develop and they become longer things and they work something closer to an article or an essay in length, not form necessarily, but in length, I post those over there too. Because I'm starting to use X as a blog, which, once again, we talked about all these terms over the years that have changed the meaning. Vlogs have changed the meaning. Podcast, because of video, has changed the meaning. Blog is something that's changed the meaning too. Like, most blogs that are out there right now aren't really what I consider a blog. They are online articles. They're online essays. They're magazine writing. They're journalism. They're structured in this way that is polished and professional, or at least they're trying to be that. Which, to me, being an early blogger, is the antithesis of what the blog is. The blog was supposed to be casual. The blog was supposed to be sloppy. The blog was supposed to be something that jumped from category to category. It was supposed to be the thing that you did when something was more immediate and you didn't want to go through the process of creating something more formal, like an article. So I'm trying to bring that ethos back to how I deal with X. And so far it's been fun. I'm trying to get to the point where I do it more. I've only posted like 2 or 3 things a day, sometimes 1 or none things a day, but just get to where I need to get into the mindset where I realize I'm having these thoughts or realize that I'm working with them in the note app and forget, like, oh, that was really good, I should share that. I forgot. Whereas Instagram, to me, really it's 2 things. Instagram mostly is what I said earlier about going around town, either having fun pretending I'm a photographer, taking pictures of interesting things, or experiencing, like lunch, or I went to a museum, and I've been kind of putting those into reels, but nobody seems to watch those, so I don't know. Maybe I'll go back to posting them as photos in the actual feed, or putting them in stories. I've been learning to appreciate stories. But then also what I've been doing is reels of, the maximum you can do as a reel is 1.5 minutes. So 1.5 minutes book reviews. When I finish a book, here's 1.5 minutes of what I thought about it. And those 2 things I really enjoy. They don't kind of necessarily work together, but I don't care. That's what I enjoy doing there. And then Substack, it just kind of, it's there. I don't know. I'm not positive where I'm going to host this podcast. I don't know that I'm going to do it on Substack. Not because I have any problem with Substack, but I think that if I ever do that read or die a slave idea that I have, then it should be on that Substack. Substack was a lot of me trying to get people to read things that nobody was reading. And I think there's nothing against that platform. It wasn't right for me. And that's why I'm doing stuff on X, because it just works better for me. Whatever I'm posting, people seem to gel with it more there. And also, I think there's something to be said about something Marshall McLuhan said. The medium is the message, in the sense that what medium you use changes what you're saying. So when I sit down to post something on Substack, no matter what I do, because I know it's going out to people as email, there's always going to be 2 problems. Number one, I always want it to be more polished than maybe what I want to write at the moment. So it becomes a barrier to me sharing, because I know it's going into people's inbox. And number 2, because it's going into people's inbox, I don't want to, there's some days when I'm very active, where I have like 4 or 5 really good ideas. I don't want to send 4 or 5 emails in a day. Whereas on X, it just makes sense. Like 4 or 5 posts a day, yeah, that's normal. So the way I approach the mediums is more in sync with the way that I work. As far as YouTube, like I said, the EDC channel, I think I'm still going to mess around with that. I just don't know when. I don't know. There's a couple things that I just haven't felt the impulse to do it. But I'm not going to get rid of it. And I think I'm just going to leave the Zettelkasten one there. Who knows, maybe one day I'll pick up Zettelkasten again on a regular basis to where I feel like I need to talk about it again. I don't know. And then I have the Read or Die a Slave. I did a couple of videos there. Honestly, my shorts did really good there. The videos on books were doing really well there. The reason I stopped doing shorts on YouTube was because the maximum is 1 minute. And I don't want to be the dude who, there's a lot of these, these videos where these reels that people do where, like, I went here and then we went here and we had dinner here. But when they record the voiceover, because they only have 1 minute, they cut out all the silences between their sentences so they never pause. So it's like, we went to dinner, and then when we went to dinner, we went here and we had a hamburger, and when we had a hamburger, the hamburger was the best hamburger, and then we went here and I bought a hat, and the hat was good because it covered my ears, and I love when my ears are covered all the way until a minute's over. I don't want people learning about books like that. Period. So a minute and a half allows me to put 1 minute of content in with pauses and the opportunity to take breaths and for a moment for people to actually digest the words that I've just said. So that's one of the reasons I stopped doing shorts over there, even though probably I would be monetized by now if I kept up with it. I don't know. I just care about books, and I don't want to cheapen it. And for me to do that, it would be, or I'd have to just say less about the book. And the reason I'm not doing longer videos is just because of all the things I said about video earlier. When I want to talk about books, I don't want to think about how my shirt looks. Is the room lit correctly? What book is behind my head? What's on the shelf behind me right now? Where's the cat? I don't want to have to think about all those things. So, well, when I used to do the solo podcasts and I would actually, let's use the phrase one more time, when the magic would happen, there's also this moment where I feel like, okay, I'm done. If I continue more, I feel like I'm pushing beyond. And every time I used to do that, it always seemed to be at exactly somewhere, I guess you can't say exactly, roughly 1 hour. So it'd be like either 58 minutes or it'd be 1 hour and 10 minutes, sometimes 1 hour, 15 minutes. Right now, with none of the editing to take my pauses and coughs and all of those things out, we're at 1 minute or 1 hour and 4 minutes. So the magic is still happening. One other thing I want to say before we get out of here, because this is something loose and I want to see how it develops, I just want to put it out there. Nobody has to do this, obviously, but I'm open to questions. If you have questions, yeah, I'm open. I'm always open to questions, and there's no specific way you have to do it, or, if you, even though I'm not posting on Substack, I still have the account. So if you say something on Substack, I'll see it. Instagram, X, I'll put the links for everything, but it's read or die slave. All one word. But I'm always open for questions. And maybe you don't have any questions yet because we haven't really, defined anything here yet, but it could be a question about anything. Once again, random badassery. If it's something I don't want to answer, I just won't answer it. But you can ask whatever you want. And if you don't, I'm still going to be here. I'm still going to have notes. I'm just going to have things to talk about. So I hope this is something somebody digs. Just somebody out there. I hope whoever you are, one person, the one that is nodding your head right now, thank you. Thank you for being the person that cares. Everybody else, you probably aren't listening anymore. And that's fine. That's the way these things work. But what I would love is if somebody out there listening right now is an original random badassery listener, somebody that goes back to the old school days, I would love for you to let me know that you heard this. Like I said about the questions, same thing, any of those places, hit me up, tell me you heard this, because you're going to blow my mind, and I'm ready to have my mind blown to know that somebody either is still around, following things that I do, or somebody noticed that this name suddenly popped up again. That would be cool too. All right, let's take advantage of the sidecar here and hit the stop button. Does the touchscreen work on this? Let's see. Nope. Gotta use the mouse. Lesson learned.